Has the U.S. been liberated? That's how President Trump wants to sell it, but detractors say his tariffs will hold the economy captive. U.S. trade partners are reeling and locking in retaliatory action. So, where does it leave consumers around the world? And can our global economy endure the pain? I'm Andrea Sankin. Today's newsmaker is U.S. Liberation Day. President Trump says it's simple. They tax our imports, we'll tax theirs. We'll even give them a discount and charge U.S. trade partners less than they charge us. But most economists will tell you it is not simple. And some say these reciprocal tariffs, i.e. a trade war, will send the global economy into recession. But Trump insists it's the only way to bring jobs back to the United States, even if those jobs are in manufacturing, which is increasingly being mechanized. So what happens now? And how do Trump's supporters and detractors think this will work? Here's a look.
The US president has unleashed his latest round of tariffs, with the entire world as his target.
Foreign leaders have stolen our jobs, foreign cheaters have ransacked our factories, and foreign scavengers have torn apart our once beautiful American dream.
Liberation Day, Donald Trump's nickname for his taxes, saw him impose a 10% tariff across all imports to the USA, bringing charts out on the White House lawn, an extensive list of reciprocal tariffs, dozens of countries targeted with a range of tax rates. Approximately 60 countries the White House deems worst offenders in unfair trade practices. And across the board, an extra 25% on all car imports. China is being tariffed at 54%, which includes some taxes that were pre-existing.
The US side, under the guise of reciprocity, imposed tariffs on products from many countries, including China. This seriously violates WTO rules and severely damages the rules-based multilateral trading system. China firmly opposes this and will take necessary measures to resolutely safeguard its legitimate interests.
The EU is facing tariffs of 20%. Ursula von der Leyen said negotiation was still on the table, but the EU is preparing further countermeasures to protect European interests and businesses.
President Trump's announcement of universal tariffs on the whole world, including the European Union, is a major blow to the world economy. I deeply regret this choice. Let's be clear-eyed about the immense consequences. The global economy will massively suffer.
Leaders of individual EU nations were singing from similar song sheets. France vowed to target online American services. Stock markets from Wall Street, the EU, and Asia took a tumble at the uncertainty the announcements have produced. Japan, which is a huge car manufacturing nation, expressed disappointment at being targeted by 24% tariffs.
We have repeatedly called on the US government to rethink its unilateral tariff measures on various levels, but the fact that such measures were implemented despite these efforts is extremely regrettable.
Two surprising omissions, Canada and Mexico. They were not named in the list of worst offender tariffs. While Canadians and Mexicans might view this as good news in isolation, they are already being hit with existing 25% import duties on steel and aluminium. And several other nations were only hit with the new 10% global baseline. The UK's Prime Minister promised no knee-jerk reactions. Australia, a close ally of the US, said it would not retaliate to the 10% tariffs, but said that the US's actions were not those of a friend.
For Australia, these tariffs are not unexpected, but let me be clear, they are totally unwarranted. President Trump referred to reciprocal tariffs. A reciprocal tariff would be zero.
Brazil's Congress, meanwhile, approved an economic reciprocity law, allowing their president to respond to trade barriers directly. But where does this leave the world? As many leaders have expressed, nobody wins in a trade war, and with prices sure to rise for American businesses and the public, will Donald Trump achieve his ultimate aims to bring manufacturing back to the US?
So why is Donald Trump so convinced this trade war can be won? Well, joining me now to debate that and much more are from Ottawa, former Canadian diplomat and host of the Canadian Global Affairs podcast, Colin Robertson, and from Texas, Republican strategist John Thomas. Well, let's get started then with the panelists we do have here. And I'll begin with you, Colin, because Trump is calling this reciprocity. So what you do to us, we'll do to you. We're going to level the playing field. At a fundamental level, does that sound fair?
No, because he's basically upturned a trade agreement that he signed and negotiated when he was in office the last time that involved Canada and Mexico and the United States, and was the successor to something he thought was a bad agreement, the NAFTA that had come into effect in 1994. And this agreement was working well for all three countries. The prosperity, all the economists seem to think this worked well for Canada, the United States, and for Mexico. We didn't so much trade stuff as we made things together. And the prime example of that is our most traded commodity in North America, and that's automobiles, with parts made in Mexico, Canada, United States, and crisscrossing the borders several times before they're assembled in one country or the other, as an example.
Right. And I mean, John, Colin's only talking about North America in this context here, and why this is, first of all, unfair, and in essence probably won't work the way it's applied because you're breaking trade rules. Is that correct?
Well, there's a couple ways to look at this. First of all, I think President Trump's looking at this at a much more macro level than simply one country's relationship with the United States. He's looking at an entire rebalancing of trade from the perspective that the U.S. has been hemorrhaging manufacturing jobs due to globalization now for several decades, and that the other countries are unfairly charging tariffs where the United States isn't. So he's basically saying, look, if you're going to charge us tariffs, we're going to charge you the same. He's trying to level the playing field and re-onshore some jobs, particularly as it relates to car manufacturing and other industries. Look, the jury's still out, but if we're trying to read the tea leaves, what we're seeing at my firm that advises multi-billion-dollar international conglomerates, we're seeing most of them look at this as an opportunity to onshore a large portion of their manufacturing in the United States. And if Trump didn't bring these tariff reciprocal threats, there's no way they would have ever done it.
Okay, John, but you're counting on these jobs coming back in manufacturing. Manufacturing is, by and large, being mechanized more and more all the time. So, I mean, isn't the number of jobs that will effectively come back so, minimal compared to the amount that could be lost by keeping these trade agreements active and keeping a global trade dynamic fair?
Well, it's not just a jobs argument, although a jobs argument is one of the leading arguments. It's also an investment argument. Even if it is an automated factory, there's hundreds of millions of dollars that a company would have to invest in the United States to build those are construction jobs, to build the plants. Those are security jobs to secure the plants. It's investment as well. Look, President Trump doesn't like seeing this one-way trade relationship with so much of the world, and he's attempting to rebalance it.
Colin, it's interesting, though, because if reciprocity is the way to rebalance it, the problem with reciprocity here is that especially when we look at the developing countries being targeted, there is no symmetry. You cannot act like the economies of Madagascar and Cambodia and the U.S. should be held to the same trade standards because the consequences are completely disproportionate. I mean, you risk plunging already struggling economies into total destitution. So would creating greater global poverty overall serve U.S. interest?
I don't think so. For the last 80 years since the Second World War, the United States has led the democracies on open markets and freer trade in the hope that would help promote an advanced democracy. And I think that has largely worked. Not perfect. I understand what Mr. Trump's trying to do, bringing jobs back. But as you point out, automation and technology have changed radically. 100 years ago, most of us were engaged in agriculture work. Well, we're producing more product out of agriculture than ever before with far less people. The same is holding true for manufacturing. We're moving now into services where the United States enjoys significant advantages because of, again, innovation, technology, because it is the country that leads on these fronts. I think he probably will succeed in having some reshoring, but the calamitous effect on the global economy is going to be significant, and I think risks in the shorter term throwing not just the rest of the world in recession, but also the United States. One part of Mr. Trump's claim is he wants the European allies and Canada to spend more money in defense. Well, we're all going to spend more money in defense, but if we don't have an economic base to generate the capital to spend on defense, how do we do that? We're upending, as they say, 80 years of an approach that the Americans led, and I think with great success, raising millions, truly billions, from poverty. And that's, I think, now at risk. Yeah, especially if you're a developing country.
Indeed. I mean, John, do you fear what the blowback could be of punishing poor countries? I gave the example of Madagascar, but we're also talking Ghana, Lesotho he's targeted, South Africa, all being faced with the tariffs and then cuts to aid on top of that. This is, creating more poverty and then potentially massive destabilization. Do you fear that there's going to be a price to pay for that?
Well, first, Colin's right. The U.S. has, in fact, led this globalization trend. And what President Trump said this yesterday, by the way, he said he doesn't blame the other countries for trying to rip off the United States and tariff us in a one direction. He blames the United States leadership for letting it go on. So he's here. He's ripping the Band-Aid off. It might be painful temporarily, but he's resetting that whole situation. And to your point also about these smaller countries, look, I think President Trump, one thing we know is he's a deal maker and a negotiator. I think a lot of these reciprocal tariffs, particular on these tiny countries, are opportunities to negotiate favorable deals. And that's what we're going to see in the coming weeks.
But I mean, favorable deals with a country, like Ghana, that's economy is so, yeah, go ahead.
Well, yes, sure. Look, favorable deals could come in a variety of ways. We've seen President Trump's deep interest in rare earth minerals in places like Ukraine and the continent of Africa. These countries have cards to play, and they're just going to need to play them over the coming weeks.
Okay, John, go ahead, Colin.
I was going to say, John, I would question, because look, we redid the NAFTA. We came up with in what you call the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement, negotiated. Mr. Trump said the best deal ever. He's effectively torn up that deal now with his approach to both to Canada and Mexico. So how do we trust, when you say we sit down and negotiate with Mr. Trump, how can we have any trust that what he says is actually going to hold? Because we've seen this example of a trade deal that we thought worked for all of us and was ratified by Congress. And now Mr. Trump has just basically said, no, it doesn't apply anymore.
Well, it's right. He's retrading it. There's no doubt about it. But it's not just you're going to have to trust the United States.
Before you do so, he just went ahead and did that. There's no negotiation, no discussion. We're trying to get into negotiation, but we're getting differing signals from the administration. We understand that the buck stops with the president, but he doesn't appear to be. Well, we'll see. As you say, every day it's a different approach. But
here's the deal, Colin. He's been forecasting. You keep going back to 2016, which is nearly 10 years ago. But he's been forecasting on the campaign trail since he ran this cycle that tariff is his favorite word. He's actually been very consistent in following through with his promises. So look, it's a new regime. It's a new administration. This does happen when new political power comes into control.
His promises do keep changing, though. I mean, he promised to trash NAFTA and make the best trade deal ever for the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. Now he has it, and he's trashing it again. But, John, I have to move on to something else with you, because he's burning economic bridges, some say, and diplomatic bridges with U.S. allies. But there's also the issue of how he's going to face the U.S. consumer. Can he survive not getting consumer prices to come down quickly as he promised? His pundits, I know, have used this well, this is like a home renovation. You'd kind of alluded to the same thing. It's messy for a few months, then it turns beautiful. But a lot of people have to live paycheck to paycheck. They can't hold out that long. And by the way, it's interesting that the home renovation metaphor is really something only wealthy people would really be able to understand. Kind of ironic that that comes talking to people who are really facing some economic hardship in the United States. So how long does he have? What's this grace period going to be when he promised to bring prices down on day one?
Well, this is the fundamental problem that President Trump has. He and his team are very confident that in the long term, his rebalancing of trade effort is going to work. But it's the question of, can he survive politically in the short term? So far, President Trump has a lot of good, strong political will and capital. Obviously, that will diminish over time if we don't start seeing significant results. But this is also why, not only in addition to generating more revenue via tariffs, which President Trump thinks will happen, he's making significant cuts with things like DOGE. You know, it's both cutting spending and increasing revenue. He thinks that the American consumer and the American in general is going to reward that. And also, let's not forget, in just a couple weeks, President Trump's going to be pushing to renew his historic tax cuts, which are very popular with everyday Americans.
With DOGE, though, he's also leaving tens of thousands of people unemployed. He says he's going to create jobs in the manufacturing sector, but cutting all these government jobs means that people will not have jobs, even if he thinks it's cutting government spending.
Well, there's not a lot of sympathy for government workers, just bluntly, in the U.S. So the average American consumer doesn't shed a tear for somebody who works on transgender studies in Zimbabwe.
They're consumers too, though, in the end. You still have unemployed people.
Sure. And a lot of them took a 12-month payout, so they have a grace period to go figure out what they're going to do next.
Okay, well, Colin, let me come back to you, because the Canadian Prime Minister just said that they're actually, in a way, just going to rise to the challenge. They're going to build the strongest economy in the G7 now. Do you think they can, and do you think this could give an opportunity to other G7, even G20 countries to come out stronger?
Yes, but it's pretty bitter medicine. Yes, I think that's right. I think that it has acting as a catalyst within Canada to, first of all, reduce our internal trade barriers, the unfinished business of Confederation. It's acting as a catalyst to diversify our trade, because 75% of our exports go to the United States and 60% of our imports come from the United States. And if that's not reliable, we're going to have to find other markets. So yes, and we do have the critical minerals, and we do have a lot of opportunities, oil and gas in Canada, the resources, the people. So yes, I think it is already sensitizing Canadians that we can no longer depend on a country that we thought was a friend, a partner, and reliable neighbor.
John, what will happen if other countries come out stronger in all of this? How will the U.S. be left to feel?
Well, look, I think President Trump wants other countries to start to carry their own weight, particularly when it comes to defense and military. So I think that would be a win for the rest of the world, and a win for the United States. If a lot of these countries can kind of carry themselves, that's a good thing. President Trump believes, though, that it is a privilege to trade with the United States, and he wants to see that more rebalanced. And look, I know we disagree on this panel. I think it's actually going to work. I think the American people's patience is going to be long enough to see success here, and the U.S. will be better for it. And President Trump's entire campaign promise is America first. He's not running to be president of the UN or the World Trade Organization. He's figuring out how to help the United States, and he believes he's on the right path to do that.
But John, yeah, I mean, you say he's trying to figure out how to help the United States, but you've also said there's a real lack of clarity on whether these policies will work. You know, Trump has gambled before, especially in his personal businesses. He's declared bankruptcy, he had to, with 6 different occasions. Is this not too big of a gamble to take? If he's gambling in private industry with private investors, that's one thing. This is not just the American economy, this is the global economy. I know you think it could work, but it is incredibly risky for everyone.
Well, I think President Trump thinks that the U.S. is hemorrhaging manufacturing. You can go to a bunch of towns in the U.S. that are completely abandoned, empty buildings everywhere. So I think from President Trump's perspective, we couldn't be doing any worse than we're doing now. That something has to change. Something drastically has to change, both on the cut side, which he's doing, and on rebalancing trade and increasing revenue. And this is the pathway that he sees, and I think he's going to be successful.
Okay, Colin. I mean, Canada and other countries have to kind of sit by and watch this happen, because right now the U.S. does hold these cards. They are the largest economy on the planet, and this is what they can gamble with if they feel like it. So fine, Canada's just going to have to sit back and watch, maneuver, and do whatever they can to protect their own economy. I'm going to ask, strangely, though, about another potential fallout.
I would say we're not going to sit back. We will take action. Our prime minister's already saying we'll take retaliatory tariffs. Already some are in effect. We're already seeing some support within Congress. Yesterday, for example, we had people like Mitch McConnell, Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins block or support an initiative by the Democrats to say lift the fentanyl tariffs on Canada because national security shouldn't apply to a country that is our ally, both in NATO and in our binational alliance, NORAD. So I think we're going to see pushback in the United States against President Trump. Again, that's how democracies work, and we'll see what happens. I'm always willing at the end of the day to bet on the sound judgment of the American people. They may make a mistake once, even twice, but they've got a pretty good track record. And certainly when you look at the history of imposition of tariffs that we saw yesterday, as we saw 100 years ago with Smoot-Hawley, it did not work out well for the United States, and you got a new administration 4 years later.
Right. And if we also look at history, Colin, this might seem like a little bit out of left field, but it's still, like I say, if you look back at history, are we looking also at the risk of spawning a real black market here for criminal elements looking to avoid steep taxes, importing illegally cheaper products, and developing on that level instead? Because if things become too unaffordable for Americans, that's when criminal elements can step in.
Yeah, possible. I think more likely not between, I think, Canada and the United States, where we've really worked very hard and continue to work hard to create a perimeter so that you know who's coming in terms of goods and people. That's something we share in common and want to continue to work. And Mr. Trump has encouraged us to do more, and we are doing more. But I think that what you're talking about, we could see elsewhere.
Okay.
On the black market front, that's happening right now. Chinese companies, in order to avoid tariffs from Trump 1.0, have been cheating the system, typically going through shell companies in South America and just avoiding our tariffs that way. Actually, the reciprocal tariffs make it harder to create a black market because there is no backdoor to slide through and cheat the system.
But having said that, John, I mean, Americans want and are used to getting cheaper products. And American companies have appreciated cheaper manufacturing abroad. So will there not be more motivation to try to work around what Trump is doing? Because you're looking at a certain level of desperation here for people who want certain things.
Well, there's a couple things there. Number one, companies like Walmart have told their Chinese manufacturers, you will not raise your price and you will absorb these tariffs or figure out how to onshore manufacturing. So Walmart said our customers aren't going to see increased prices. And what you guys said earlier about automation, one of the wonderful side effects about AI and automation is it brings down the cost of manufacturing goods. So perhaps one of the things we'll see the outcome here is that goods will actually stay the same or get cheaper, in fact, because of automation.
But then what about the jobs?
Because of this. Well, there will be new jobs that will be created because of AI and new capital invest in the United States. But President Trump saying we can't exist as we are today. America has to do something to fix this trade imbalance.
Okay, Colin, there's the rosy, I guess, end game. Is it possible?
And to your point about borders, I think we're going to see utter confusion there as with de minimis rules changing, much more emphasis on rules of origin. I do feel sorry for anybody working in customs and border enforcement now, because they are going to be spending days trying to get through backlogs and determining the origin and what the components that go into things back and forth entering the United States. And I'm afraid it'll ricochet into other countries. And that will also have an effect on the international trading system. And I'm willing to bet, and I think, John, you would have to agree, you're going to have to hire a lot more people to work at customs and border enforcement now, simply to put into effect these new rules.
John, do you agree?
That, or if Elon Musk has anything to say about it, we'll automate it. We'll figure out how to automate it.
Again, I was just about to say, okay, so the people who lost their jobs in the other sectors of government can go to the U.S. border, but you're saying that won't even happen.
we'll see, but it has to become more efficient. That's for sure. Colin is right. With all of these additional rules, we have to figure out how to make government more efficient, so it doesn't slow things down.
Yeah. Okay. Quickly, John, though, if inflation doesn't get under control, some are expecting it to go up. What are American consumers going to do? They're already struggling. And this was a deal breaker in electing Trump.
Well, remember, on the one hand, you're seeing a lot of cuts to government spending here from the Trump admin. But yes, inflation has to come down. Absolutely. Look, I think the president's going to get a grace period. That's hard to say how long from the American people. President Trump and his supporters are betting that inflation is going to come down. If it doesn't, then Trump's going to have to adjust. We'll see what happens. But I'm optimistic because I'm already seeing it work, at least from our client base.
Okay. That will have to be the final word. Unfortunately, we're completely out of time for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank both of you so much for being with me, and our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.